and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode number 14, I think, of Let's Agree to Disagree. In one of the corners, we have Dan.
Hello.
And in the other corner, we have Marwan. Sadly, Reyes is playing with his cable ties today, so he can't come along. Today's topic will be tyre pressure when we're going off-road. Who would like to start?
That's a very interesting topic, actually, and I'd like to start, if I may.
Go ahead.
Quite an interesting subject. Tires are super important, and the contact patch of the tire on the sand or on the rocks or on the road is, at the end of the day, almost everything. This is what gives you the traction. This is what gives you also the stability. So, pretty wide subject. And experience plays a role. Type of tire, type of rim, type of vehicle, and type of terrain. So
where I would start, because and why we kind of picked this topic is there's always someone that's asked, what pressure should I be driving at? And in a way it's a good question, and it's a question when someone asks you, you know their level. If they're asking you, most likely they're not sure, and it means they're not that kind of experienced. So it all starts for one reason, is how much grip do you need, and
Or what terrain you're going to be driving on initially.
and that's it's to do with how much grip you need, and that's dependent on the terrain you're going.
Of course.
So in sand, we can't actually clarify sand as one terrain, because you have, for example, Liwa sand that's super soft, and then you have, Badaya sand where there's loads of tracks, it's not that soft. So it all comes down to the terrain you're driving on and the grip you need. If you have a super heavy vehicle, then the pressure you have to deflate is probably going to be higher than if you have a super light vehicle, because you have so much weight pushing down, your tires will balloon even at a higher pressure. And if you have a very light car, if you decrease the pressure a lot, it's still not going to give you much of a balloon effect. So it's all a game to see how much grip you need, and how much, as you said, the footprint of your tire, the contact patch of the tire that you need for the conditions you're driving in.
But it also depends as well on the actual tyre. It depends on the actual wall itself.
Yep.
If the wall is too weak on one of the sides, if you do go too far down, then the actual rubber inside starts rubbing
Yep.
and creating friction. You can wear out the inside of the tyre.
Correct.
So it all depends on basically on.
And if you deflate for too long, and you actually can have the rubber, and I've had this quite a lot on the old SCT Pros, the rubber at the edge where it meets the grip, the pattern, and the bare tire wall, it starts to separate there, and you get a crack all around because you've been driving it underinflated, or for too long underinflated.
So should we start talking about, let's say, a stock vehicle, and then we can talk about a heavy one, and then a light one, and we take it from there?
Yeah.
Okay. So we do agree that the more we deflate, the more contact patch we have, and the more traction and flotation we have.
Yeah, up to a certain point. Because your tire, the more you deflate, will actually start to come in, and you'll get a bump in the middle where it's actually not touching because you've deflated so much.
Okay.
It'll be sagging on the side like someone who's too fat, and the center will be
But let's say theoretically. Okay, but then why don't people deflate that much? Because there are some risks. One of which you mentioned. Actually, you mentioned two. Because you can spoil your tire, and because you can actually become counterproductive when you have that bulge in the center. Plus, there's another risk is of a pop-out.
Yep.
And this is super annoying if it's hot outside and you get a pop-out. You need to get your
I've
jacket.
got a few in the last few weeks, and it's horrible.
It's just you just basically just.
And one thing to add to that as well is your tire actually is a large part of your suspension, and that's why we use rubber tires. Is the air inside the tires acts as a damper to the surface of the road. So the more you deflate, the more dampening effect you have, and you can actually feel this a lot of the time if you deflate and you're on the road. If you go over a speed bump, you have a lot of this.
Softer.
It's much softer.
Which brings us to another risk also of damaging the rim.
Yeah.
Because you have less pressure inside the tire, so less
Less room.
Less room. Any hard hit will whatever surface you're driving on hit the rim, and you could bend it accordingly. Okay.
It's always finding that sweet spot, isn't it? Between the actual, how much you go, depending on the sidewall, etc. Like the BFs, the very hard wall, they can actually make a good suspension and make it nice and bouncy.
So what would be the sweet spot in your opinion?
For me, as I said, I generally like the BFs. I know many people kind of disagree with this one. I
was going to actually mention them earlier. Is that BFG is notorious for having a really rigid sidewall.
Yeah.
So even though you deflate quite a lot, it doesn't sag. It doesn't give you that sag.
That's why I like it, because I know that I can go down to a very low pressure, etc., and I can get a lot of grip. But especially when you're going over the different terrains, there's a lot of movement to that tire. So because it's so bouncy and etc., and then that's what I do enjoy. When I've done the Yokos or anyone like this, or even the Toyos, the old ones that I used to have, you can feed it. You can go down quite a bit, but then you know you're hitting the rim. You know you're touching it, and then of course the pop-ups is also a big thing.
Okay. In my case, I don't like the BFs in general, although they are, I would say, amazing all-terrain tires. But for sand, I don't like a tire with a strong sidewall.
Me too.
Which makes it very heavy duty.
Agreed.
But this is me personally.
Me too.
So let's say we want to talk about sweet spots. I would say someone that's going to the desert and is a beginner shouldn't be below 15. That's
a stock vehicle?
On a stock vehicle. This is an average, it's very hard to get it 100% right.
I think for a stock vehicle, you can pretty much give a PSI. You can say 15 to 18 PSI on all vehicles is going to be roughly similar, because OEM cars, they don't come with extreme sizes of rims. They don't come with extreme tread patterns. They're mostly road tires and mostly 17-inch rims or close to that.
Again, something you said where I would I have a different opinion on would be, if the car is a heavy car, I would prefer that the driver keeps the pressure relatively high.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what you're saying. Okay.
Because you have more weight pushing down, so you get a bigger contact.
To disagree about. I'm leaving, guys. So we agree. If the car is heavy, you can deflate a little less. And why? Because the heavier it is, I would say the more it would be swaying, and the more it sways, the more chances of a pop-out.
Yeah.
While as if you have a light vehicle, there's so much less pressure on the sidewalls and much less chance of a pop-out. So my sweet spot for a beginner, regardless whether it's a light or heavy vehicle, would be 15 to 18. I would push towards the 15 more, and tell them to take it easy.
On a stock-ish tire.
Yeah.
So I had a very interesting. Sorry to cut you off. I had a very interesting time when I first. So I was off-roading with the Prado and with a Jeep Cherokee with stock tires, stock rim, not modified vehicle, for the first 4 years of my life with my dad. And when we bought the Jeep, we put on STT Pros, mainly for the look at that time, and we took it off-road. And we'd be driving for 4 or 5 years. We knew how to go off-road. So we deflated to 16, and we went. And we just kept getting stuck. And we couldn't figure out what it was. And it's because we went from a road tire, where 16 is great, to STT Pro, which at 16 is pretty much straight. Yeah. And we struggled. And then we went for a drive with other people, and then suddenly we realized they're all deflating to 8 PSI. And we deflated to 8 PSI, and we're like, this is totally different experience.
Because normally when I take people out, it's especially in the summer, I tend to tell them go down to 12, even if they're beginning, down to 12, etc. Because it's so hot, the sand is so hot that the tire will inflate. By the time you've driven 20 minutes, it's already gone up to 15, 16 anyway. So so they get a little bit more grip. Yes, it's a lot more dangerous maybe if they do get a pop-up, because they probably don't know.
Not dangerous, but trickier.
Tricky, exactly.
I like that. It's more challenge. Let them learn. Let them learn what's the limit. So I like your way of doing things.
So it's basically it all depends on, again, terrain, depends on weather, depends on the heat, etc.
You brought that element. You brought the element in, which is heat.
Yeah.
And in summer, for example, the most common drives are either early morning drives or late evening drives, and that's perfect actually for this example. Is that if you start an early morning drive, the temperatures are relatively cool. And the range from in 1 hour, it can change 10, 15 degrees, the air temperature. And that translates to sand temperature from the sun as well after a few hours. So you have that. As soon as you start driving, within an hour or two, the temperature of what you're driving on, the sands or the rocks, is going to skyrocket. And your pressure is going to go up.
And you have friction also, which
and friction,
it even more. You're right.
So it's been so many times, we're driving and somebody keeps getting stuck. And I'm like, check your tire pressure.
Yeah.
Because it's probably gone up so much that you're struggling. Decrease it by, a few PSI and you'll be fine again.
So we do agree that 15 PSI is a safe.
It's a safe bet.
It's a safe bet for a beginner on stock tires.
Yeah.
And people leading convoys of professional leaders can venture and go down to 12 PSI. They will enjoy driving more. This is what you were saying. They would enjoy driving more because there's better grip, better performance, but a little bit more chance of a pop-out, which is also part of the game and of the sport. Now, going to performance tires. Let's say you've got performance tires, so aftermarket tires. Let's talk about mud terrain, which you brought up. So if you've got a mud terrain, it's got a relatively strong sidewall. You would definitely not start at 15 PSI.
It doesn't make a difference, yeah.
So you would start
I would say
12 and
8 to 10.
8 to 10, even for a beginner?
Yeah.
Okay.
8 to 10.
8 to 10.
So this is where it comes to my personal preference. If you ask me what I drive on 8. And if I'm in a difficult area, I even drive on 6.
Okay, but
because I don't like to drive fast.
But you're experienced.
And I'm experienced. I know the angles my tires need to be at to not get pop-outs.
Okay.
I've been driving a lot, and in the last year I've only had one pop-out, for example, even on 6. But if it's someone following me in my convoy, I would never recommend them to drive on 6. I tell them 10 or 8.
Okay, so 8 to 10 for
on a mud tire.
On a mud tire for a beginner following a proper convoy. What would you say?
A little bit higher. Just a little bit higher. I wouldn't go below 10.
I wouldn't either. So 10 to 12?
Probably yes. I'll probably normally, as I said, if they're mud terrain, if they're beginner, I'll probably just say 11 front and then 10 back, or 12 front and 10 back, just to get that little bit more traction on the back.
I actually always do
Let's
the opposite.
talk about it later, about
Yeah.
front and rears. Let's talk about it later once we're done talking about these. That's actually quite an interesting topic.
Yeah, because I would say opposite.
No,
Why?
definitely not.
You should have always less in the back and a little bit harder on the front.
Sorry, no, I thought you said more at the back. No,
No,
it should be less at the back.
Less
Yeah,
in the back.
Less
yeah,
air.
because you're
So deflate more at the back.
yeah,
Yeah.
because your front tires
And
are
again,
turning.
we agree again. So you're in the 10 to 12s.
Yes.
You're in the 10
So
to 12.
why would you say 10 to 12 and not 8 to 10?
I just find it a little bit kind of going down to 8 is a little bit tricky. Yes, okay, mud terrains. That's another conversation. There's so many mud terrains and so many different tires, but it is just a little bit risky. I think at 8, especially for a beginner, just to go because it all depends on that angle, isn't it? You'll get that dodgy angle where he's going to the right, but then he'll just turn his steering wheel to the left, and you'll put all the pressure on that one side, and it'll just automatically.
And would you say that an all-terrain tire, like something like a Yoko, Cooper 83?
When you're getting to this, then I would refer to the type of sidewall the tire has. Because
Okay.
you can't generalize. For example, a traditional 83, it doesn't really have a sidewall.
It's got 2 or 3.
Pretty soft slides.
It's
Yeah.
pretty soft. Whereas the new 83 XLT, which is what I drive, it has that sidewall. So you can
Okay.
still, even on the XLT, I still go down to 8 or 6 on an all-terrain tire.
Okay, what about a beginner that has something between a Cooper 83 in terms of design and something like a Cooper 83 XLT? Where would be a safe range?
10 to 12.
10 to 12. So on a mud terrain, you can afford to go a bit lower.
Because stronger sidewall and
Okay.
more, in general, they have stronger construction, so they're a bit stiffer when you
Okay.
inflate.
What would you say?
Yeah, it's good. Again, the muds are always, it's because of the teeth that they have. Again, it's to do with the terrain. When you're going down, as I said, in the sand, because they dig in so much, especially the mud terrains. It's a tricky one, isn't it? As I said,
Yeah.
So I've always kept it myself and all the tires that I've driven and all the people I've driven with. It's always try and keep it within that 10 10 I think has always been my safe spot. If you're going in winter, normally I do say to them, go a little bit higher, maybe 12 to 14.
Okay. And for someone with experience, so for the beginners listening to us, like whenever they reach a point where they start understanding their tires and how much deflate, what are the pressures you guys run at? And also mention what type of rim you have, and then we'll talk about it later.
So I have just a normal, not beadlock rim.
Okay.
Normal negative offset rims. And if it's just a beginner drive, it's 8 psi.
Okay.
And if it's something technical, difficult, challenge, I even go down to 6, depending on the sand. It's when you get to that point when you're experienced, it's personal preference and circumstance you're in. For example, if you go to Liwa but it's been raining, you don't need 6.
No.
Definitely.
And in that case, actually, if you deflate too much, it's a bad thing. You need it a bit more rigid to dig in a bit more. But as if it's traditional Liwa, soft sand, you do notice. I've noticed so much difference in that small difference from 6 to 8, because you actually have an exponential change in your balloon effect at lower PSIs. So the change from, for example, 15 to 10 is probably smaller than the change from 10 to 8.
Agreed.
So me personally, I would always run on 6 if I didn't have any damage or pop out risk. I would always drive low, because it's actually less strain on your engine. Your engine needs to work less because you're floating. It's like having snowshoes, right? The whole point is increase the surface area as much as possible.
And especially if you've got BFs or the XLTs or mud terrains, you have to go that lower, so
Exactly.
it just gets more.
So
Especially in the sand.
So what do you run your tires at usually?
I've got BFs and I've got the Mopar beadlocks.
Okay.
I normally go down to 8.8, and that's what I normally go down to.
Okay.
I think all the way around.
That's good. Having now for those listening, like a beadlock would definitely avoid at least 90% of a potential pop out. You can still pop out from the inside, but that's great. I would say the same. If it's a easy drive, I have beadlocks as well, but even if I didn't, I would be at 8 psi. And if it's challenging, if it is technical and there is soft sand, I would go down to 5 or 6. Now there is a very fine line between speed and flotation, and this is something you also mentioned. The more you deflate, the more grip you have. The more grip you have, the more friction you have. The more friction you have, the less fast you can go.
Yeah.
So this also gets us to type of terrain, type of driving, technical, super high dunes, and things like that.
Let's say waddies. What would you go down to?
It depends. So waddies, it purely depends on the type of drive you're doing.
Let's say
if you're doing like a hardcore rock rolling and climbing over stuff, maybe you need to deflate a bit more because you need that extra grip, right?
So what would you go down to? So you go Shoka, just to
20,
just to say
20, and if you need it, maybe a bit lower, 18, with a mud tire. Because you don't need to deflate as much as you do on the sand, and if you do deflate that much, your tire is gonna get destroyed.
I do know some people that actually deflate quite a lot when they go to waddies. But it's true. That might you get all these little stones that just slash the sidewalls, etc. So
your tires are not built to do that on rocks.
In my case, if I'm in waddies, I like to go down to at least 8, not rock rolling, at least 8.
Really?
This is taking into consideration that I'm driving very slowly.
And you still drive it 4 low?
And I would drive it on 4 low. I just like I like 4 low. I'll be on like 5th and 6th.
But why so soft?
Because for the comfort. That's purely for the comfort.
Yeah,
but as long as
but you'd have to be so careful. Even
That's my case. Yeah, I'm very careful. That's in my case. But then if I'm doing a bit of rocks, then I would maybe go 10 to 12. Again, if it is slow driving. And depending on how tough it is, if I feel that the rocks are touching my rim, this is where I would inflate a bit. So I would play around depending on the weight of my car on that day, if I have my camping gear or not.
True.
Yeah.
And
that's what it should be.
speed.
That's what it should be all the time. It's not a set scenario of this is the PSI you should be at. It changes every time. If you have more passengers, if you have your cool box full of stuff, if you're going camping, if you have the roof off, it changes every time. Every time you go out, your PSI might be different. And that's why I want to come on to a point where I know a lot of people who they don't use a gauge. They just do it by eye. because they know that they need this much sag in their tire. The only thing for me, I don't personally do that because I like to know the PSI I put it at, just for me, that's me. But when you do it by eye, it comes on to so many things like the angle you're at. If you're slightly to the side, there's more pressure on one side, so you need to deflate it less, and so it's not exact. Then it could be different on each tire, but the whole idea is the same, right? The idea is to get that sag, to get that balloon effect. So if you do it by eye, and see on a flat pavement, this is what the tire looks like. Let me check what the PSI is at. You could use that as a reference and say, okay, I deflated. This is how it looks. It looks nice. Not too inflated, not too underinflated, and it's at 8 psi. So I'm going to drive at 8 psi.
Okay, makes sense. Do you guys have any idea what PSI does rally cars run at?
Rally?
Yeah, like desert rally. Like the point is, I'm not sure, but I know that they definitely drive above 15 or potentially above 20 because they need that speed.
If you do a small jump and you land, your tire won't come off the rim; it would burst out of the rim. Even with a bead lock, if you're at low PSI, because there's so much impact. So yeah, I would say probably 15, 20 if it was a guess, but I don't know.
No idea.
I don't know.
So I think we spoke about pretty much everything. Maybe we should, before we wrap, just mention why we believe that you can deflate more the rear than the fronts, and what type of rims would allow you to deflate more and stay safe towards having pop-outs.
I'll leave my comment to last because it's a bit controversial and it'll probably lead to another episode. But I hate beadlocks.
Okay.
I would never recommend beadlocks.
Why is that?
Because it's a product that is for lazy people or people who don't want to learn.
Then we'll keep this for another talk.
I know it's controversial, but
to have or not to have beadlocks.
Exactly. But to give just a short summary is, having a pop out is totally within your control. There's very few circumstances where you couldn't have done anything to stop the pop out. It's all to do with your hand on the steering wheel. If you're on a side crest and there's a sharp bottom, there's a certain way you can steer, or you stop early, or you accelerate more to avoid that bump so that you don't have a pop out.
We'll leave this
so yeah,
because I would disagree in many things. I would agree in some, but I would disagree in general. So,
but to come on to it, to the question you asked, is fronts should be a bit more inflated because they're turning, and when you turn, the whatever terrain you're going against is actually going to hit your sidewall rather than your tread. So there's more side force pushing your wheel off the rim.
So they're more prone to
pop outs.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
So keep it a bit more inflated on the front and the back. They don't really turn much.
And for safety, we can say that a bead lock or a bead grip would help avoid the pop-outs.
Potentially help, yeah.
It does help.
It does help.
It does help.
Now, we'll put the lazy part aside, but it does help. It does help. Well,
I do prefer bead locks, I'm sorry.
Me too.
I did say it's controversial.
Me too, but I don't want to even start.
Yeah, next episode. Another episode.
Great.
So anyway, so I think that we've all agreed in this episode. We haven't really disagreed about anything, which is quite boring. Sadly, we didn't have Reyes to kind of disagree with all of us, like usual. Please like, share, and subscribe. Write your comments on the bottom, and see you next week. I'll let Dan do the wink this time. But
no, if you do the outro, you have to do the wink.
Oh God, come on. Done. Thanks, guys.